Good afternoon and welcome to Let's Talk Environment with the good folks from the Finger Lakes Land Trust, Andy Zepp and Kelly Maykosh. We're very happy and excited you can be with us today and learning a little bit more about what's going on in this sector of the mission-driven world. My name is George Ferrari and I serve as CEO of Your Community Foundation. We've been doing Let's Talks for I don't know, 15, 16 sessions now. We're going to continue them into 2022. And we have additional ones coming up, available information on our website. All of the Let's Talks have a video and many of them have PowerPoints that are archived on our website at cftompkins.org. So thank you for being with us today. We have a bit of a presentation and then we have some time for questions and conversation. You can put questions in the chat box and the folks here with the Community Foundation join with our entire team: Jenna Kutracha, Chief Impact Officer; Nancy Masici, Chief Development Officer; Jesse Galbraith Nocera, our Administrative Coordinator; and Amy Levere, Chief Philanthropic Services Officer, who produces these events for us. So I'm going to turn it over to the good folks right now from the Finger Lakes Land Trust. We're very excited that you're with us. They've been grantees of the Community Foundation and also happen to have a designated agency fund here at the Community Foundation. So a good partner in the good work that you do. Welcome.
Great. Well, thanks, George. And thanks, everyone, for joining us. I'm going to start with a very brief PowerPoint that covers a lot to give us time for questions and to mention, if we don't get to your question, I have chosen correctly, so I'm in my office on this rainy day. So feel free this afternoon to follow up with a call because we're going to touch on some big complicated issues that we won't have time to fully cover. And in terms of, I want to tell you a little bit about the land trust, but really talk about four big interrelated issues that are affecting our environment in Ithaca, Cayuga Lake, and the surrounding Finger Lakes. And that is climate change, land use changes, invasive species that have been introduced from other continents, and then overpopulation. And in this case, I'm not talking about people, I'm talking about white-tailed deer. But before getting into that, I just want to provide a little background about the Land Trust. We're now 32 years old, and simple idea is save places like this. This is Lick Brook Falls on the Finger Lakes Trail in the town of Ithaca. You see a shot from the 19th century and the 21st century, still looking pretty good. So our goal is not to stop development, but secure those lands that we all value by not telling people what to do with their land, but use tax incentives and fundraising to secure, these sites. Next. And what that looks like today is we protected more than 27,000 acres. You can see we were founded in Ithaca, so we've done a lot of work here. We do 3 different types of projects. We have nature preserves that typically have trails, a place to park, very popular and well-known. But we also use a tool called a conservation easement. We now have more than 160 of these agreements that limit development on lands that remain in private ownership. And we continue to monitor those sites and work with those owners. And then increasingly, we're also working with partners, whether it is the town of Ithaca and creating town park land, New York State to create state park land and environmental conservation land, and in some cases, other nonprofits and the federal government adding lands to the national forest. Next. But where all these issues kind of connect is the emergence of cyanobacteria or toxic algae as a problem. Cyanobacteria have been around for millions of years, but they kind of are inactive until you get the right warmth, you feed them nutrients, and then those conditions blossom into these toxic algae events. This is from Owasco Lake, but we could show you the same things on Cayuga, and it's a problem region-wide and around the globe. Next. And one of the key issues is climate change. So first is we're getting warmer summers, the temperature's warmer, but the other part of it is land use. This is off 89 by Sheldrake after a thunderstorm. This is a soybean field that you can see a lot of muddy runoff that's going straight to the lake, which carries phosphorus and nitrogen, which is what these cyanobacteria need. So phosphorus isn't necessarily a bad thing if it's really deep and cold, but if it's warm, it can be accessed by these cyanobacteria, and it's a big problem. Farming has always been in the Finger Lakes for a long time. But farming today is not farming like farming even 20 years ago. If you have large equipment like this, you don't want to turn around your tractor too often. You're competing on a global commodity scale. So you want to maybe rip out that hedgerow that used to slow down water. You want to use crops that are what they call Roundup ready, that have a pesticide treatment, so that come June at planting time, there's only your plants and no weeds, meaning less holding the soil. Next. You also want those fields to drain well using systems called tile drains that have been around a long time. But if you drive in Ulysses or Lansing, you see farmers putting these in to increase drainage, so in the spring they can access the field, which is a reasonable thing to do. But what you do essentially is interrupt the water table. So you reduce the absorptive capacity of a watershed sometimes by half, which means when it rains hard, more of that water is shooting into road ditches like this, which is another part of the issue, that shooting it with those nutrients into Cayuga Lake. So this is all understandable why we did this, but this is the result. Here's Taganic after a storm, where you're seeing that sediment plume, which is silt, but it's also these nutrients that feed the blooms. Now, again, if it goes in 500 feet of water, that's not a problem because it's too cold to be activated. But at places like Stewart Park, that warms up in the summer, and that's where we're having these concerns. Now, the wild card in all this too is we had zebra mussels hitch a ride on freighters to the Great Lakes that filter all these nutrients and alter the balance. But they're in the Finger Lakes, but they're not as abundant as their cousin, the quagga mussel, that came later. So aside from these land use and climate issues, we think that these invasive mussels may be altering the nutrient cycle in a way that is favoring these cyanobacteria toxic algae outbreaks. But this pretty little waterfall is another example of climate change, because this is Maple Avenue in West Danby after one of our increasingly common severe storm events. So when you look at farm fields or simply road ditches, when we get 4 inches of rain in about an hour, which we're starting to see in localized areas more and more, it is pumping tremendous volumes of nutrients into the lake. So that's the other part of climate change. That's the new normal. Warm air allows clouds to hold more moisture. So localized, we're getting these intense storm events. In terms of land use, I want to mention agriculture looms large in our region. Simply because we're a rural region, we have a lot of agriculture. This does not mean that development for commercial or residential purposes doesn't affect the lake as well. This is not Cayuga Lake, so no one on the call has to get nervous that I'm pointing out your house. This is on Skaneateles Lake, where you can see the construction of the site. You can see the sediment entering the lake. And also, though, this brings an issue for the future. If you go to Wegmans and see where most of our produce comes from, it's nowhere near here. And yet the Central Valley of California, with climate change, we can't guarantee that's going to be producing food in the future for us. So we need to be careful we retain our best farmland, where in New York State, we used to grow lots of vegetables that now maybe is not economic. But in the future, when you see a development like this that really is eliminating that farmland, which is some of the best in the Northeast, that is another issue. In this case, I just want to mention that house has a little bit of notoriety in Skaneateles. We always pick on the convicted drug dealer. This house was actually on the west side of the lake, seized by the federal government by US Marshals. So we don't worry, they're not donors, so the land trust is safe. Next. In some cases, what this means is we need to give more room to our streams and wetlands. So it means getting, backing off the stream. This is the Owasco Inlet up in the little village of Moravia, where simply every year the creek was scouring out all that land. Today, the land trust purchased that and it's restored state wildlife management area. Next. Now, we have to recognize our constraints, though. This is a view from Ithaca Falls, looking at Fall Creek before it was channelized. So Route 13 isn't there, and you're looking at the woods behind Stewart Park. But what strikes me is you can picture where the high school is, and the high school was a delta. And Ithaca was largely a wetland. And as we look at trying to address water quality issues at the south end of the lake, we just have to recognize that the system has been radically altered that limits some of our options. Good comparison, Watkins Glen, big wetland in Watkins Glen. You can swim in the park at the south end. Ithaca was a wetland. Now we don't have a wetland. Can't swim in Stewart Park. You don't have that filtering function going on that you have over in Watkins. Next. But one thing we can do is use nature to heal nature, which is restoring streamside forests that have been cleared. They play an important role in filtering runoff, shading streams, enhancing water quality. The land trust is starting to do that region-wide. Next. Which brings us to a related kind of issue. Planting a tree is not hard to do. Planting a tree in our region, many regions, and getting it to live to be 10 years old is really hard to do. This beautiful animal was in the city cemetery between Stewart and University. But what started as more of an urban problem, region-wide with each rural home and kind of sprawling development pattern, we have a big issue with deer overpopulation. Next. This is how we've come used to these open forests. This is in the town of Ithaca by Lick Brook and Town Line Road. And this is what's called a deer exposure. On the right is the current condition with deer grazing. And on the left is when the deer are excluded. And you can see how much of an impact this level of population is having on regeneration of the forest. So this is a big issue for many reasons, including other animals such as forest songbirds. They don't have that nesting cover. It's exacerbated by this invasive species issue, where here you're looking at an autumn olive, which was intentionally introduced, but has kind of run amok in some areas. We have invasive species issues. Some are unintentional, like the emerald ash borer. The insect killing our ash trees is believed to come over on a shipping pallet. But then we have others like this that are intentionally introduced but get out of hand. And the issue is the deer generally favor the native plants, so it gives these invasives even more of a competitive advantage. And yet frequently they don't provide as much habitat value. Next. Another way we can get at restore habitat. This is a case where we're actually working with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to restore vernal pools, seasonal wetlands, ponds, that all of which held water to provide habitat for particularly important for birds, where we've had major population declines, but they're also important for filtering runoff, to let that water settle out and recharge the groundwater and not shoot down the road ditch into the lake. Next. That bulldozer was in this field you see in the lower right. That was last fall. And this year, you can see now those 4 pools that were created. One of them's year round, several are seasonal. They provide important habitat for birds and amphibians, but again, they're also more like this landscape was 200 years ago. So when you get these storm events, it holds back more of this water and more of those nutrients and let them go back on the land and not straight into the lake. So this is what we need to do on a wide scale. With climate change, scale is important too, because we recognize that species are going to have to move and their connections will matter. So that's why we're focused on projects like this one we call the Emerald Necklace around Ithaca, which is connecting our existing 50,000 plus acres of undeveloped land, because we know that species are going to move north and more intact systems are more resilient to invasive species. Next. These lands are also really important for water quality. This is part of the Emerald Necklace in Dryden off Irish Settlement Road. Our Rory H. Park Preserve has thousands of feet of frontage on 6 Mile Creek. And as we plan for the future, this is important. We're working with the city of Ithaca and Tompkins County to secure the watershed, which is not a very big watershed. And we have to think ahead of 20, 30, 50 years from now, when we will still be relying on that drinking water, but need to make sure we've protected the lands that are most important. Just wanted to highlight this connectivity is really important for mammals such as the bobcat, which are wide ranging, and they are sensitive to their habitat being disrupted by houses, particularly with dogs and so on. Next. And in that Emerald Necklace, a lot of what we do is puzzle piece by puzzle piece, securing 50 acres of woods here, 100 there. But the most threatened land that we really are focused on is the lakeshore. And we've had some real success this year. We acquired just north of Myers Point, more than 200 acres with 4,000 feet of shoreline earlier this year. It's our Cayuga Cliffs Preserve. that also provides the scenic backdrop to Teganic Falls State Park. If you go to the shore there and look across, next slide, that green view, 4,300 feet of that lakeshore is now acquired by the Land Trust. And this is, we'll be opening that preserve to the public in a year or two. Won't provide lake access because of the steep bluff, but will provide some terrific views of the lake. Next. And now many of you have heard of Bell Station. We are in the midst of negotiations with New York State Electric and Gas to purchase 470 acres that features the shoreline you see here, 3,400 feet of gentler shoreline than our Cayuga Cliffs property. So this will be publicly accessible. We've been working on this for 10 years in partnership with the State Department of Environmental Conservation. And we were quite concerned when this was going to be going to public auction, because both government and nonprofits are bound by an appraisal process that in this hot market, we weren't confident that we would prevail in an auction and didn't think that the public good would be served. So we're now dealing directly with NYSEG. Our hope is to acquire the land, then utilize most of it for a state wildlife management area. And then based on interest of the town of Lansing, looking at some of the easternmost part of the property, converting several ag fields to solar energy production. Next. Before opening it up for questions, just want to say a few things of what you can do for the environment. Well, of course, you know, not just for the environment, for Kelly down below, you can join the Land Trust to keep her employed and all the good things that we do. But really learn more about the Land Trust, our website. We do a lot of protecting land, but increasing stewarding land and working on restoring it. But in your own, if you own a home or you're renting, favoring native plants, reducing lawn chemicals, creating small habitats, whether it's for pollinators like monarch butterfly or birds. Energy is critically important. Climate change, it's one thing to do what you can, which is at home is great, but really what's really needed is support for more aggressive public policies. Our state is doing well. Now it's time for our federal government. And then this water issue is not as simple as having a factory where you fix the pipe, because we don't have a lot of what we call point sources of pollution. It's really all around. So it's from the Wegmans parking lot or a lot of different farms or the road ditch. And a lot of this can be tackled at the municipal level, and it's hard. It's really hard work. So I would say educate yourself about what's going on, and then potentially getting involved at the town level, because every town has road ditches and runoff they're dealing with that they can do a better or worse job. And then lastly, on the food front, you know, to the extent you can, eat local and eat organic. Next. Just want to mention a couple of things. I know a number of you are already members, so thank you. But the Land Trust is primarily supported by individual members. That's how we do what we do. We work in 12 counties now, more than 200 municipalities. We've grown to have 16 staff, but actually we couldn't at all possibly do everything we do without volunteers, which is a big part. We have a special section of our website about water quality where you can get information about that. And then to help people connect with the outdoors, we also created a totally separate website, which is great information about where to go just for the best hikes, paddles, bikes, and so on, which is gofingerlakes.org. And the last thing I want to mention before opening it up to questions is one of the issues we're really working on right now is trying to figure out with the different tribes of the Haudenosaunee of how we can work together in different ways across the 12 counties. So for example, last year we acquired a site near Canandaigua called Clark's Gully that actually fits in with the origin story of the Seneca Nation. So we've reached out to the Seneca and are exploring how, you know, securing that land and making that land accessible to them can be, you know, most helpful. So that's kind of an ongoing discussion, but through the Haudenosaunee Environmental Task Force, we're really trying to kind of align our work more with our native tribes. and that is just starting. And it could involve lots of things, but we had a meeting, a day-long meeting with the members of the task force, and that's kind of I think a significant new direction for us.
Great.
So with that, I covered a heck of a lot in a short time. So I'll open up to whatever questions you have.
You did. Thank you so much for all the work that you've been doing for so long and the good work of the members of the Finger Lakes Land Trust. I believe Nancy Masici in our office here has been watching the chat and for questions to come in through that. But one quick question maybe to start with, if Nancy doesn't have any right now, is how have you seen things change since the pandemic, if at all, Andy?
Two big changes. One is we've been fortunate that we've seen an increase in usage of all our preserves, state parks, and what have you. And I think with that usage has come appreciation. So we've been able to gain new members who got out more and really valued what we do more. The other thing, though, in the negative way is with people being able to be more flexible and get out of the city. Anyone who's familiar with the Ithaca real estate market knows it's been white hot, as is Skinny Atlas, as is Canandaigua. And we've shifted for much of my time. It's been kind of a buyer's market. It's now a seller's market. So there are key parcels like this last undeveloped lakeshore. It's really hard. It's a lot harder now, particularly when we're bound by appraisals, and appraisals are really good at looking backward, but not forward.
Great. And I was mistaken. Amy is doing questions today. I'm sorry, Amy. I think you have some of them in the chat. So I'll turn it over to you now.
We are having them come up fast and furious in the chat. So just kind of to start that off, what is it that an individual can do to help address the harmful algae blooms?
I think the single biggest thing right now is to get involved at the local level of working to solve the problem of runoff or reducing runoff, because every community in our county has systems of road ditches that some cases are longer than the natural streams. And frequently they're not managed quite as well as they could be, because it's hard to do. But this also is the nexus too, because all the road ditches in the rural areas are fed by farm runoff. But even in Ithaca, there's so much room for improvement, and it's so obscure. So to just elevate that as an issue, that's something where we really can move the needle. And the first part is just self-education. There's a Cornell professor, Rebecca Schneider, who lives in Ulysses, who's done terrific work on this topic, and really she's down to earth and makes it understandable. And Kelly, do we still have her program on the water quality part of?
We do. I can pop a link in the chat.
Yeah, we'll provide a link. She's excellent. She's a great researcher, but she's also on the Ulysses Planning Board, and she's really looked locally, and that's a place people can make a difference.
Along those lines, are there other collaborators that you're looking to point people to as well?
Well, I think each of our lake associations play a critical role. So the Kegu Lake Watershed Network moving forward, because a lot of the issues facing our watershed, it's not a question of buying the last shoreline. It's more, how do we grow and change in the future in a way that is better for the lake rather than worse? So in addition to local government, I do see the companion to that are all of our local lake associations.
And you're probably seeing in the chat as well, several questions around, what work is happening near Seneca Lake? What about issues with Bitcoin mining? And can you also give any type of update or information about the Boy Scout property coming up for sale?
Yeah, a couple of things on Seneca Lake. One, we're working right now to protect an undeveloped stretch of shoreline on Seneca Lake, which again, region-wide, that is the scarcest and most threatened resource out there. So we're working on that right now. We're also in Queen Catherine Marsh, that large wetland near Watkins Glen. We're in the process of adding about 140 acres of wetland next to the Catherine Valley Trail to the state ownership there. On the Bitcoin front, that's a case where I think that's really not the land trust niche. It's really an advocacy issue. And I know Anna Kells has proposed legislation. I personally have great concern about that enterprise or any enterprise that's devoting energy in that way. But for those that are interested, I know that Anna, our local assembly representative, has proposed legislation that would address that. In terms of Camp Barton, as we were dealing with Bell Station, there's been a lot of concerns about this nearly 100-year-old Boy Scout camp located just outside the county in the town of Covert, Seneca County. The Boy Scouts are having major issues, financial issues. The national organization's in bankruptcy. Locally, they've had some major declines in enrollment. And as they merge these councils, they have excess camps. We have been trying to work kind of as a catalyst to maximize conservation of the site. Hopefully, I think it would be a great addition to state parks. State Parks is thinking about it. State Parks is the agency would have to take care of that. So it's easier for me to say, here, invite the public on there and take care of it. But that's a possibility. We've also explored a range of scenarios with the Boy Scouts. So that's very much in process. Big challenge there. There's a public road through the entire site within about 100 feet of the lake. So if you're looking at managing that for the public benefit, it's very challenging. Unlike Bell Station, which is pretty wild shoreline, you can decide, well, where do I let the public go? That site is, from an oversight standpoint, is much more challenging, aside from all the buildings and whatnot. So stay tuned. I predict a few more twists and turns on Camp Barton, but we're pushing for it, as are towns of Covert, Ulysses, and the village of T-Bird.
Thinking more about right on Cayuga Lake, I mean, what more to say about Stewart Park? Will there be swimming? Can you talk about the cost of potentially what it would take to make that happen?
It's hard for me to envision, because I would think, you just have all the nutrient and all the runoff entering from these stream systems. And again, it's like we had our kidneys removed. You have no filter. And if you were to go down there today, I would predict you're just seeing a lot of sediment loading. That happens constantly. So I don't know an easy way. I think you'd have to separate the swimming area physically from the lake itself. I just think that without the wetlands to filter, just all that sediment, and some of it's not toxic, it's just mud. But I think for a swimming area, I think it's going to be very challenging.
And I know we've hit you with many, many questions, and there's more. One of the other things, one of the last ones to bring up, is thinking about land use and farmers. Is there best ways or best practices to engage farmers around reducing phosphorus use?
Yeah, it's very difficult, because our biggest issue is that in terms of area, most of our farming is commodity farming. It supports milk and grains. And milk, I think they do fairly well nationally. But if you think of, you live in upstate New York as a farmer, and you grow soybeans and corn, and you compete with people in Iowa, Brazil, Australia, and think about how difficult that competition is. So they're trying to eke out every advantage they can. So on one hand, we're working the short term to get a buffer here, getting a back away from the field there. But there's a more fundamental question of how we can have people live on the land and make a living farming with something other than commodity crops. Because the way those commodities are is, in my view, just not very environmentally friendly. And yet you're locked in this competitive race with everyone else growing those crops. So it's very difficult, but I think that is the long-term answer, is to figure out what are the economically viable alternative crops.
I want to thank you, Andy and Kelly from the Finger Lakes Land Trust, for making this a quick dip into all things environment and land use. There's a lot more information. You've given us good resources, given us a lot of good information. We've had a lot of people signed up for this particular Let's Talk. It will be available on our website later today. Upcoming next Let's Talk is November 9th. It's only 2 weeks from today, believe it or not, November 9th. And that will be with Gary Stewart from Cornell University, campus, community, and COVID. And we have other ones lined up that Amy has produced for us, one in December on immigration and one in January on on survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. So again, if you have ideas for us about Let's Talk, we're continuing that through 2022. Thank you for taking time with us and have a good rest of your day. Try to stay dry. And my wish for you is no leaks like we have in our house right now. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. It was